The plot of the novel begins in the county of Florida. Parents talk to their young unmarried daughter about getting her finally married. The girl agrees with them. The man and the woman did not expect this. Usually, the conversation ended with the girl rejecting this idea in any of its manifestations. But here, the father could not stand it. He could not believe that Sylvia was ready to marry Duke Belfort. The mother said they don't make her do it. If she doesn't want to, she can simply refuse. The girl did not understand the reaction of her parents, because she did not think that she always behaved so strangely. Sylvia spent the last 22 years in bed due to illness, and therefore she did not have the opportunity to go out into the world and attend balls and evenings where young aristocrats usually gathered. The girl slept a lot, so it was easier for her to endure the attacks of the disease, from which she suffered for a long time. And finally, Sylvia decided that it was time to stop suffering and tormenting her relatives. So don't even think about it. Father was against Duke Beaufort. Although His Majesty himself recommended the aristocrat as a son-in-law, the man did not consider him a good match for his daughter. He was ready to look for another son-in-law. Sylvia assured that she was ready to marry the Duke, and that's why she advised her parents to just calm down. Parents burst into tears of happiness. The time they had been waiting for had finally arrived. Sylvia Floretta was the Count's only daughter, and therefore she was constantly surrounded by the attention of her parents, who were ready to fulfill all her requests and wishes. Dad and Mom always tried to please her by buying. The daughter was not cranky, so she was happy even at the smallest thing. She asked for little. The most important thing for her was comfort during rest, and therefore only the bed in which she lay was important. Sometimes the girl behaved very strangely, which worried her parents. Often they talked about how their poor daughter would live when they died. The woman asked her husband not to even think about such a thing. The old Count told the woman that they would not be able to take care of their daughter forever. Parents had to die of old age sooner or later, and Sylvia will remain alone in this terrible and treacherous world. And together, the parents volunteered that they should find a husband for their daughter before they start to feel bad from old age or get sick. The search took a very long time, and the father almost gave up hope. But in time the king said that the Count could take Duke Belfort as his son-in-law. Father could not believe that Sylvia would agree to marry a man she had never seen. The Count and his wife were very happy that they would be able to marry off their daughter before they became old and died. They didn't even think about the fact that Belfort's duchy enjoyed a bad reputation. Demons were often there, and Sylvia hoped more that she would die there very quickly. In fact, the motive that prompted the girl to agree to her parents' proposal was the desire to end the suffering. The girl was afraid to end her life by suicide. She did not have the courage to do it. The Count and his wife were not to guess what their daughter was up to until she left the county. On the wedding day, everyone around was just talking about such a significant event. The subjects rejoiced that their lord had finally decided to marry and continue the glorious line of the Dukes of Belfort. People congratulated each other on such an event. The Duke himself did not understand such a reaction. Previously, everyone dissuaded him from such an intention. And now, on the contrary, they rejoiced like children. They rejoiced as if the holiday was about to take place in their place. No one else looked at him with surprise. The Duke was next in line after the Crown Prince to the throne of the king. And that's why all the country's aristocrats were suspicious of his wedding. But despite all this, the greetings from his friends and subjects were pure and hearty. The only thing that was asked of him on this day was not to frown and not to make such an angry face in front of the bride. And then the poor girl will get scared and run away from the temple itself during the wedding. A few months ago, he had not even thought about the wedding. But everything changed when the idea was heard in the royal court that the Duke should be married to a representative of a good family. His Majesty himself spoke about the fact that Count Floretta had a daughter in issue. She was extremely beautiful, but had certain health problems. His lineage was ancient, and therefore they were a wonderful party. Belfort himself thought it was coercion well disguised as an offer. His Majesty was concerned that the Duke could expand his possessions and influence in the political field. Belfort did not want to be tied to the capital's aristocracy. It was in his interest to simply strengthen his dominion, because his lands bordered the demon kingdom of Kelvidia, and therefore military power was the main thing. And on the other hand, his refusal to the king could cause a food crisis in his lands, and then the situation will become even worse. After weighing all the pros and cons, the Duke agreed to His Majesty's proposal. The Duke looked at his subjects, who were rejoicing and shouting loudly with happiness. He could not believe that people could care about his fate just like that. The boy suspected that they were doing it out of politeness. Everyone is sure that the wedding will make the ruler more kind, but he promised that he plans to add more dawn training for his soldiers and knights upon his return. The court magician Austin created a magical portal that was supposed to transport the Duke directly to the capital. There was some risk of using portals to move, but it was quite small. The magician asked Belfort to step aside and wait a little. The magician worked on the portal for a very long time, almost all night. The aristocrat praised for a job well done. The main thing in his organization was trust and gratitude. The Duke thought that he would like to get along with his wife, but for this he needs to weaken the protection of the inner world and get rid of the complexes that hinder him. And Count Floretta could turn out to be a spy. But he threw doubts out of his head. After all, nothing will change from this, and he was nervous anyway. The Duke strode decisively into the portal. The unknown awaited him ahead. In the wedding hall, Sylvia's parents warned her that if she was insulted by her husband or his family, she could return home and not tolerate their abuse. The Count and his wife promised that they would live longer than her. The girl assured that everything will be fine, and she asked that she could be alone before the solemn ceremony. She thought about how she would live the life she so feared and did not want. In the corridor, she met Duke Belfort. The bride introduced herself, but here she did not tell the whole truth. She used to be Alice. Before rebirth, Sylvia was a different person from another world. Sylvia's real name was Alice. She was a powerful sorceress, humanity's last hope in the war against demons. 100 times she was reincarnated in the bodies of others in order to prevent the domination of demons. Everyone respected the sorceress. She enjoyed the respect and love of the broad masses of the population. But her main task and meaning of existence was the fight against demons. She did her best in this field, and Alice crossed the line in her struggle. To master a new powerful power, Alice began to study the dark grimoires written by the demons themselves. The sorceress coped with the forces of darkness. The warrior opened a portal to the world of demons. At the party, she announced her success to her colleagues. But something happened that no one expected. The magicians pushed Alice into the realm of demons. The reason was that they began to fear her. The girl spent a lot of time in the darkness of the demon world. She tried in every possible way to find out why this happened, but she still couldn't find an answer. After all her intentions were good, for protection. A year has passed. Alice, who fought alone, without allies, defeated the main demon, the king among the underground creatures, Basis, and became the supreme ruler, climbing the mountain of demon skulls. Even then, she lost her human form, and reveling in her own strength, and going crazy from everything that befell her. Weak people were easy prey for the sorceress, and could not resist her. At the time when people were in despair, a man appeared. He was an unusual person. His name was Cleon. It was he who was able to use the spirit of the sword and finally defeat the crazy, once so powerful sorceress. It was on the edge of this legendary sword that Alice died. Before her death, she was full of hatred for everything human, which caused her troubles and led to such an ending. All people became scum for her. But after death, the girl was reborn in a strange world. Everything around was blindingly white. Alice remembered very well how she was killed with a sword. A voice from somewhere addressed the magician and called her a broken soul. She was told that the power of darkness that she wanted to master had brought a lot of trouble to humanity and claimed many lives. And it's time to pay for your sins. And the punishment was cruel. God ordered Alice to live and repeat exactly 99 times her life in the cycle of reincarnation. After that, she tried to commit suicide several times, but she could not die of her own free will. During the entire cycle of reincarnation, she was very tired. She was constantly followed by messengers of the gods, and for every time she thought about suicide, she was to be punished. The Duke asked her if they had ever met, and asked the girl not to be afraid of him. However, it was difficult to do this for a girl who had never normally communicated with the opposite sex. However, Sylvia tried to behave adequately. When they entered the hall, all the attention of the guests was focused on the newlyweds. Congratulations were heard from everywhere. The Duke thought that his bride was very beautiful, and by itself, the thought arose in his head that he should continue to take care of her. The girl, in turn, believed that there should be no problems as long as she diligently fulfills her duty. The priest pronounced them man and wife, and each of them took an oath before the altar. It's time for a kiss. Belfort looked at his knights. He thought that his people would continue to abuse him, and therefore it is worth pretending that he likes and demonstrate how much he loves his young wife. And he didn't know how Sylvia felt. Maybe she is just as ashamed. There was a certain misunderstanding, but everything passed quickly. The Duke asked Sylvia not to be shy and to relax. And there was a kiss. Both were satisfied, but did not show it in any way. Sylvia thought she should be more careful now. God should see that everything was fine with her new husband, and for this it is necessary to pretend that everything is fine. You have to play the role again. Belfort danced with his wife. He was simply fascinated by the girl's beauty. It was easier to say that she was actually a demon. Her beauty was extremely attractive. Sylvia also considered her husband a standard of beauty. Probably everyone around the aristocrat dreamed of him, but the girl felt that she was getting sick from being tired. It's time to end the reception. The Duke thought that his wife looked too mature for her age. It was not immediately possible to say that she was 22 years old, but how beautiful she was, and everything else was not important against this background. And while the man was thinking about how to address her, the girl advised him to call her Sylvia. The Duke thought he must have said it out loud. Otherwise, how could she have guessed about it? And then Sylvia added that he could address himself as he wished. She will be pleased in any case. The Duke was bewildered by her boldness and simplicity of address, but he quickly got himself under control. He advised to call him Rendell, or as she sees fit. But he was not in the habit of speaking informally when addressed too formally. The girl said that he is a good person. The maid informed the girl that she should be ready to leave as soon as the reception was over. Everything was already prepared for this. Meanwhile, the Duke had to think about further plans. Floretta approached him. Rendell said his wife was gone for a short time. He promised that he would do anything for their daughter that she wanted, and if he misses something, they have to tell him. The Count asked to take care of their only child, who was seriously ill. The Duke assured them that they could rely on him. He will conscientiously protect his wife. But before that, he wanted to ask a couple of questions. Randall asked if their daughter had really spent 22 years at the estate. The parents were worried about this issue. They could not understand what their son-in-law was up to. The father looked at Rendell in confusion. The Count replied that the truth was as follows. Their daughter spent 22 years in the estate. She spent a lot of time in bed, from which she rarely got up. Health by nature. Sometimes the girl could sleep for a whole day. However, it should not be surprising how she behaved sometimes. The longest sleep, when she felt sick, lasted 3 days. The Duke could not believe that a man could sleep for 3 days, and that's why he firmly decided that he would go for a walk with his wife at least once a day. The magician informed Rendell that the magic circle was ready to be sent. Belfort praised his servant. He ordered to find his wife and tell her that it was time to go to her new home. The Duke was worried about whether she would like her new possessions. Sylvia was thinking about her husband in the carriage. He was very kind, but she felt sorry for him. His attitude was even better than that of his parents, and then she realized that after her death he would marry again. The girl thought more and more about the place where she was going. It was very far from her father's estates and her home. She was a little tired from the trip, and Sylvia decided to go to bed as soon as they arrived. But after looking at her husband, the girl realized that she would have to try hard today. After all, the first wedding night is ahead, and she could not be ashamed in front of her beloved man and show herself from the bad side. Duke asked Austin how he was doing. After all, he looked pretty bad. The wizard replied that everything was fine, but Belfort needed to stop using the magical travel portal. It took a lot of time and effort from the magician. There were more efficient and reliable ways to travel. They did not require so many internal resources. The Duke gave the go-ahead to try something new next time. Randall asked if there was a way to get them transported to the castle at once. He said that Austin was actually a very powerful mage and was up to the task. The wizard understood the owner's motives. Austin asked Rendell if he was willing to pay extra for his efforts. After all, This morning he used up the last of his mana, and to restore it, you need a good rest, for which you need money. And if the owner refuses to pay extra, then the magician will not do anything. This was his principled position regarding his efforts and work for Duke Belfort. The Duke felt some uneasiness. A strange noise caught his attention. Belfort ordered the magician to create a magical dome around the carriage and the squad of knights. There was a possibility of an attack by demons at the beginning. The man drove up to the carriage and ordered Sylvia to close the windows and storm them. In no way should she reveal her presence. After all, danger was clearly felt around. The attack was to begin in seconds. A demon that looked like a dog or a wolf jumped out of the forest. The Duke ordered a circular defense, because such a monster would never attack alone. But the main priority now was to protect the carriage. In an instant, the entire squad was surrounded by silk-like demons. People turned out to be many times less than the attackers. It was strange that there were no monsters in this forest before, and they appeared here today. A monster already covered the ground, but the attacker no less. The knights could not understand where the monsters came from. People started to get tired of being on the defensive, but life depended on them. The Duke stood in the midst of the defeated opponents. He regretted that his wife had to be attacked by demons before they even reached his domain. He was most concerned about how she felt. Geoffrey, Duke Belfort's knight, finally saw that the number of attackers was dwindling. There are only 5 monsters left. Most of the demons were defeated by the Duke. Each of the knights was very far from his power. Unexpectedly, 2 children came out of the forest for the night. They just walked along the path, trying to guess the right way to the village. The knight asked what the children were doing in such a place, and how the monsters did not come across them. Geoffrey ordered to quickly leave the battlefield and go to the carriage. After all, it was not known whether the attackers were lurking somewhere nearby, but the children, realizing where they were, could not even move. The knight was distracted by the children, and one of the attackers took advantage of this. With a powerful blow, the monster threw Geoffrey under the carriage itself. The monster fell into a battle shawl, and therefore was almost invulnerable to human attack. At the last moment, the Duke saw his wife getting out of the carriage. He couldn't understand what was driving her. Randall yelled for her to get back, but the monster was faster. He attacked. The monster's movements were so lightning fast that Belfort doubted whether he would be able to help in time. In addition, there were more demons again, and the number of defenders was rapidly decreasing. But something happened that none of the defenders expected. An aura of darkness surrounded Sylvia's figure. Monsters fell dead at her feet. The girl asked Geoffrey, who saw it, to be silent. No one was supposed to know about it. The Duke ran to his wife. He asked if she was okay. The girl assured that everything is fine. She noted that she was impressed by how bravely her defender fought, and then she pointed to Geoffrey, who was lying next to him. The knights rushed to the wounded comrade. They asked the sorcerer to help. It was necessary to cast a spell in a magical way to stop the bleeding. The magician ordered to put the victim on the ground. Sylvia herself did not notice it when she took the Duke's hand. She understood this later, and in order to break the silence that reigned between them, she assured her husband that the knight would live, and even in the future will fight with monsters. But for this, you need to go to the Duke's castle as soon as possible. Rendell valued the lives of each of his soldiers very highly. He always kept the most faithful and experienced soldiers with him, with whom he fought more than once. A few days later, after arriving at the castle, everyone who was present during the demon attack gathered around the knight. The brothers rejoiced that Justin survived and began to recover. Everyone was talking about the fact that Austin made every effort to save. The knight was apologizing to his new mistress for the bad impression he made on the woman during the first meeting. In addition, he remembered how she defended herself from the monster that attacked her. Sylvia replied that nothing terrible happened, and the most important thing is the life of each person. She thought about herself, how the children they met in the forest felt. Messengers should have been sent to the villages to find out whether the children had disappeared. The Duke's wife saw that the knight alone would not have been able to save her because he was much slower than the attacker, and that's why the girl used magic, about which she still remembered something, and the method turned out to be very effective. She herself thought that she had not used the knowledge of black magic for a long time, but in some unknown way she was able to do it. But to be honest, when the demon approached her, she thought that death was not such a terrible option. The Duke assured that Geoffrey would be paid 3 times the amount for his work to restore his health. The Duke took care of his subjects, moreover, when they were his soldiers. The girl looked at her husband and wondered how he would behave when he saw the torn and tattered body of his beloved. After all, he was so young, by her standards, and he loved her so much in such a short period of time. And therefore, taking pity on the young Duke, Sylvia decided that she would live, because she felt very sorry for Rendell. But one should not forget about the sorcerer, who actually very carefully controls everything that happens around him. He must not be allowed to feel near the use of dark magic. At least it was used for good purposes. Now she was supposed to look like a good, normal person who couldn't use magic. The head maid came and asked the lady to follow her because everyone was already waiting for her. The Duke and his wife did not understand what this woman was talking about. They looked at each other in surprise, and the guests came to 2 at once. A butler and a housekeeper were waiting for them in the hall. Also, almost all the servants were gathered here. The people welcomed their new mistress and her husband. It seemed that every subject and even the children loved the Duke. Rendell asked the butler, whose name was Wilport, why they were meeting Sylvia at the infirmary. Thelma, a housekeeper, came to help her husband. She said they were waiting near the wounded knight. Sylvia thought about how motivated the Duke's servants and subjects were. It was supposed to mean something. She addressed the audience and said that she was very happy to meet you, and he hopes that in the future they will have good relations. The butler and the housekeeper rejoiced at the hostess's attitude. They showed her to her room. The room that had been set aside for the young Duchess had once belonged to the old Duke's wife. All things will be changed to new ones. Even the portrait of the current Duke's parents and himself will be changed. Instead, they will paint a picture with Sylvia and her husband. The girl thought that she once met Randall's parents. Regardless of how long she lived, Alice is forced to be reborn again and again. After all, she can't just die like that. Memories did not allow her to live peacefully, and she carried all the memories and thoughts about the past. One day, when she fled defenseless from a village attacked by monsters, Alice came across a man and a woman who were fighting monsters with swords in their hands. The girl came to the rescue and drove away the attackers with magic. Alice warned that travelers should not wander into such places with such a small team. The defense attorney pointed out the direction in which the couple could have gone to the path that led to the nearest town. Finally, the strangers asked her to tell her their name. The girl asked not to tell about the fact that they saw her. And just now, Sylvia remembered how skillfully those people wielded weapons. And the clothes, although ragged and dirty, were of a rather rich cut. These were people from the portrait. The housekeeper was surprised how carefully the girl looked at the portrait, and Sylvia herself thought that the child she had saved then had now become her husband. It was difficult to realize and understand finally. It was like a joke. The young Duchess was taking a bath. The maid who helped her cared and worried about the girl. They tried their best to please the girl. A rumor about the poor health of the new owner has already spread through the square. The girl praised the maid. They were very happy. One of them frankly said that at first she took Sylvia because of her incomparable beauty, for a demon, a cub's bitch. Confused, the Duchess asked if she was really that beautiful. The maid assured that she would be very happy if she could live at least one day with such a beautiful face. But the bride was now thinking about how she would behave during the first night with her husband. She believed that she should do everything well and very quickly, and she was afraid that Rendell would turn out to be a pervert. It scared her a lot. In this case, she needs to somehow very quickly put him to sleep, but it will definitely happen. Sylvia thought she could do it in an hour. Her hair was perfectly coiffed. The girl wore the most beautiful robe and was completely bathed and smelled nice. In any case, her husband should have been satisfied. Sylvia entered the room. She noted that the Duke was in very good physical shape. The man, in turn, asked if they could sit down and talk now. The girl replied that when she is already here, of course they can. Randall sat down right next to his wife. He thought that the girl had already been through a lot today, so she should be given a rest. But this wedding was a decree of the Emperor, and the marital duty had to be fulfilled. The wife began to take off the Duke's clothes. He stopped her and asked what she was up to. Sylvia looked at Belfort in surprise. She told him to continue talking while the girl took off her robe. The Duke asked what his wife wanted from him and why she was taking off his robe. Randall looked a little confused. Sylvia asked if it was not their duty to spend the wedding night together so that their hearts would unite. Herzog assured that the word duty was pressing on him. He doesn't want it to sound forced. He didn't want to do that. The girl replied that it does not burden her, but she doesn't really want to do that. Rendell said the problem might be that she doesn't like him. The wife said that she likes him very much. He asked her to get off him because this position was too much to begin with. Sylvia offered to switch places. The girl realized that she had messed up. She openly told her husband that she likes him because he is very handsome and handsome. Sylvia believed that she had disgraced herself in front of the Duke and said something unnecessary. She changed her mind and said that she would not do anything, and now she will get off her husband. And then the wife lost consciousness. Rendell thought that it might be the effects of an encounter with demons. However, poor health could also contribute to this. The girl was of noble birth, and she might have been embarrassed by the brutality of today's attack. Moreover, the most seriously injured person in this battle was right next to her. She saw the smallest detail of the fight. Sylvia fell asleep right on top of her husband. At first, Rendell wanted to call the butler, but then I realized that it would look very strange. Therefore, it is worth leaving everything as it is, although it is very close for the first time. The girl woke up in the early morning. She asked if they did what they agreed to do. Rendell replied that he still had the sense of conscience and honor not to touch a sleeping woman in order to do business. Sylvia was lying on top of her husband. The Duke offered to talk, but it was inconvenient to do so in such a position. He asked his wife to move aside and get off him. The girl replied that she did not mean anything like that. Finally, the lovers sat down at the table. Too many dishes were prepared for breakfast. The Duke said that it was he who ordered so much healthy food to be prepared. After all, the Duchess was tired yesterday and had to renew her energy reserves. In addition, he ordered the servants not to enter the room so as not to distract or interfere with Sylvia's eating. The girl was surprised because she thought that she was mistaken for some very hungry girl. It confused her a little, but what was even more worrying was that nothing serious happened yesterday, and she fell asleep right on top of him without even waiting for him to lie down next to her. And she also thought that she was considered a lamb that needed to be fattened. The girl directly asked Rendell when they would have their first wedding night, which never happened yesterday. He repeated his words that he didn't want the girl to do it by force. He couldn't just use her like that. Sylvia asked what she should do when they start pressuring her and saying what kind of woman she is when she and her husband did not have a wedding night. The Duke assured her that no one would dare to say such a thing to her, and any gossip about it will be punished. Alice thought that people had given up even on her, who was ready to do anything for the sake of humanity, and a normal couple had to fulfill marriage agreements, and the girl could not do this on the first night they spent together. And will there be certain guarantees that no one will slander because of it? It was a bit naive and strange from the outside. There was no point in pretending. The girl decided to tell about her whole life. Rather, about all her lives that she lived before that. Now she must die an ordinary death. But for this it is necessary to play before God the role of a good wife and a suitable couple. And so Sylvia offers a definite deal that will benefit everyone. The only condition would be that the Duke had to hasten her death. And Rendell once said that he could not spend the night with a person he did not like or love. So they will have to love each other. And to begin with, you need to get used to touch. So he had to give her permission to touch him whenever Sylvia wanted to. It sounded strange and confused the Duke, but the girl quickly added that she was ready to fulfill all his wishes. Rendell asked where exactly his wife wanted to touch him, and Sylvia replied that since it was their first time, they could start from scratch. The man calmed down and gave permission to do it. There was nothing too much about it. The Duchess said he decided to do it sooner than she expected, and so she asked if there was something he wanted instead. And Belfort couldn't resist telling her to eat something good for the body, although it will be repulsive. The girl looked into the bowl and wondered how he could think of such a thing. After all, it would be better if his desire concerned something indecent, but not this. It was too much like the first time. She couldn't stand wholesome food. They were walking in the park. Sylvia still couldn't get away from wholesome food, and the guy just stared at her. The the wife could not believe that such a cruel and treacherous nature was hiding behind her husband's appearance. Instead, the girl asked the man to take her hand. This should be well marked on their future plans, and people will talk less about all kinds of nonsense when they make sure that everything is fine with the married couple. Belfort noted that if Sylvia turned out to be the king's spy, he would have the opportunity to follow her, because she would always be with him. It wasn't such a bad deal as it seemed. He felt a little guilty. But trusting a girl he had known for less than a week would be a really strange thing to do. And then, he remembered that in 3 days, all his vassals would arrive. This meant that there would be a ball and a reception. Herzog assured her that she might not worry. His servants and allies themselves are very nervous about how to behave in the presence of their master's wife, but they still want to meet them both. In any case, it will be a small banquet, and he will not keep them long. Thelma and Wilcott will help. The housekeeper will help Lady Belfort herself, but the butler will provide everything necessary for the reception. The girl thought about the fact that the mistress of the castle should usually prepare for the reception. She remembered that in one of her past lives she was engaged in this, so certain skills must remain, and she was ready for it. She promised her husband that she would do everything in her power to do what was required of her. The Duke said that in that case he had to do his part and was forced to leave his wife, and they will see each other in the evening. On the way out of the city where the Duke's palace was located, a squad of knights met boys who happened upon them in the forest during a battle with demonic animals. The little girl was happy when the men paid attention to them. The Duke personally asked everyone how they were feeling. After listening to the boys, Belfort asked them not to wander into dangerous places anymore, but to play in designated places somewhere within the city or in their yard. The boy replied that they would not go to the forest again. The children did not walk there anyway, but that time, for some reason, they went into the thickets. The Duke asked what had happened that time the child had broken the established rule. The boy said that his father and mother were upset because the grass field was destroyed and the animals could remain hungry for the next year. And the boys decided to go to the forest to see if there were any open meadows with juicy grass. Rendell said he was simply in awe of the courage and determination of the children who wanted to help their parents. But next time, don't act like that and just ask adults to go scouting with them. Belfort thought about how fields with grass for animals could remain destroyed when there was a forest nearby. And in it, knights very often carry out raids to scare monsters and regularly destroy them. And in order not to torment yourself with fruitless thoughts and groundless suspicions, you should go down yourself and check the boundaries of the village and the area in which the village is located. You can't risk people's lives so safely. The Duke gathered all his most powerful knights. He told about their purpose to patrol the forest. In the forest can be dangerous animals that have fallen under demonic influence, and monsters and demons themselves. It was impossible to be safe in this place and lower the weapon until you were sure that the barrier was working correctly and reliably. The knights unanimously answered in the affirmative and went to check the forest thickets. When everyone left and Randall was left alone, an unpleasant feeling washed over him. Whether it was because there was no one around or because the forest had long been devoid of people, this place seemed eerie to him. Meanwhile, the knights passed part of the forest. Usually, the points where the magic crystals were located were fine. Everything was fine with 4 of the 5 stones. Only one stone remained, located in the center of the forest. The Duke personally led the squad to the center of the forest, and he was not mistaken when he experienced something. The last of the stones was cracked. The dark energy deformed him, and this meant that there was a huge hole in the defense, which should be closed immediately. The knights were attacked by a demon that took the form of a huge viper. The entire troop of knights would not have enough strength to fight her, and therefore Belfort ordered to flee and save his life. The snake cannot crawl out of the stone's reach. At that time, Sylvia was drinking tea in the palace. She stopped instantly because the cup in her hand cracked. Confused, the girl thought that something terrible was about to happen. The young duchess did not yet know the danger her husband was in. Rendell fought off the attack of the last of the monsters. He single-handedly killed a whole herd of demonic reptiles. Fortunately, apart from 2 bites, no one else was hurt. The Duke ordered the wounded to be sent to the castle. The rest of the squad will continue. Belfort examined the stone. It was cut. The cut is very careful. It didn't look like it was made by a demented monster. Too careful and jewelry work. But the presence of demons was also not felt. The Duke understood that the matter was that a dark parasite had entered the forest. This is a monster that was once an ordinary person. But abandoning his human account, the parasite turned to the dark side. The people were ordered to send messengers to all the Duke's vassals, demanding lists of peasants and townspeople who had recently left their possessions. It is necessary to find traitors and demon worshippers before they do any harm. Thelma gave a tour of the banquet hall for the new hostess. She said that the king specially sent the best engineers to build this hall and the castle in general. As a result, the castle became so beautiful. On the contrary, the castle seemed not so ancient to the girl herself. Perhaps this was due to the fact that it was recently renovated. Due to the frequent visits of vassals and subjects from other lands, the hall was kept so clean. The woman said that a merchant was due to arrive soon, bringing everything necessary for the ball. Therefore, Sylvia had to prepare the hall herself before the arrival of distinguished guests, and it is absolutely impossible to do it. Chief Merchant Jerkle came to the Duchess. His name was Chat Hekla. The man noted that the owner of the castle is a real beauty. The girl asked to sit down and rest because the merchant had come such a long way, but monetary interest was more important to him than various conventions. The merchant decided to get as much money as possible from the foolish young aristocrat. This time he had a good catch. He began to talk about the high-quality goods he had brought this time. The hall, furnished with his goods and materials, was supposed to impress everyone present with its wealth and sophistication. The aristocrat sat and examined the sketches of the materials offered to her by the merchant. The maids gathered around her whispered with interest and praised the goods. Sylvia was seized with anxiety and suspicion. It's time to decide and make a decision. The girl asked what the price of the materials was. The merchant replied that considering the intention to clean the entire banquet hall, the price of the materials and their delivery would cost 30 gold. There was silence. Sylvia asked if something happened. The housekeeper replied that this amount was half of Belfort's monthly income. The girl remembered that the Duke helps a lot to all victims of monster attacks, and therefore she thought that it would be difficult to allocate such an amount. 30 gold was a lot for that kind of expense. The housekeeper asked the merchant to lower the amount or offer something less expensive. The man was angry. He asked the women if they knew how difficult it was for a trade caravan to get north because of the frequent attacks by demons and monsters. And now it turns out that he had to risk for nothing. Moreover, he already offers goods at a fairly low price. The housekeeper asked about payment in installments in such a case, but Sylvia stopped her. She asked Chuck to stop and wait a bit. She said she saw these goods 2 months before her wedding in the capital. And here, there may be such an option that in big cities, the materials have gone out of fashion and are not current, and the merchant is trying to dump them in the provinces for good money. The man excused himself that he needed some time to get to the duchy. During this period, the materials lost some of their novelty, but still remained the latest in fashion. The girl doubted it. The merchant pretended to be offended by Sylvia's words and guesses. After all, he was the same Chuck Hatla. But the girl was not lost. She said that the merchant could not point to the wife of Duke Belfort and the daughter of Count Floretta. She warned that in case of even a small part of a lie, the merchant will become an enemy of 2 families at once, Floretta and Belfort. And that's why you should think about the consequences of your words. And the punishment will be equal to the punishment for insulting the king's family. Sylvia pretended that she believed Chuck and had no doubts that the man was not crazy to get into such trouble. Chuck's nerves could not stand it. When he realized that he would now get into such a mess, the man changed his mind. Hetla said that the price of 15 gold suits him perfectly. Chuck kept silent about the reasons that made him reconsider his decision. But no one was interested in it. Everyone was happy and thanked Sylvia for her reasonable approach. When the Duke arrived at the castle and learned about the deal his wife had made, he immediately decided to thank her. But the housekeeper said the Duchess was asleep. Belfort was not very happy about this, but he would not insist. The Duke quietly approached the sleeping woman. He decided that he should quietly lie down next to her. It was necessary to behave quietly. Randall thought she didn't look like someone who lived at home all the time and had no contact with the world. Suddenly, Sylvia hugged her husband. He asked what his wife was doing. The girl said that this is how love should begin, with gentle touches and caresses. The Duchess asked why he didn't want to do it. The Duke thought what a strange woman he had met. His suggestions for today were limited to just getting some sleep. He wanted to rest after a hard day spent searching in the woods. But Sylvia fell asleep first. Herzog read the report. The man who submitted it wondered if Belfort had even tried to get to the bottom of what the document was about. After all, the aristocrat had a very inattentive look and only glanced sideways at the piece of paper. The man respected Belfort, but the way he behaved lately was very annoying and boring. The appearance of the Duke was more like a dog. The stranger asked why the Duke continued to smile. Rendell said he hoped the smile wasn't visible, but it was simply impossible to remember what happened this morning without a smile. Sylvia refused to eat good healthy food for breakfast, but the Duke knew what to do. He promised his wife that if she ate the dishes served on the table, he would extend his hand to her. But when the girl refused, saying that the hand was not enough, Randall promised her a hug. The plates were emptied very quickly. Sylvia thought that was the price for the next night she had plans for. Sometimes he did not understand his wife, who did not seem to know or refuse to understand what the wedding night was. These thoughts distracted him from reading the report. The stranger tried to shout at his suzerain, who was behaving strangely. Rendell thought more about his age and his strengths and weaknesses than the information in the document. The man asked what to do when Sylvia turned out to be a spy for the king. The Duke replied menacingly that the man was free to think about anything he wanted. But don't talk about his wife. After all, such words, thrown carelessly, can be severely punished. The magician apologized for his language. He promised that he would never again allow such thoughts in the presence of the Duke. Randall ordered no more mention of it, and it is better to think about strengthening the power barrier. The sorcerer replied that for this it is necessary to find a stone much larger than all the previous ones. He could do it on his own, but it would be very difficult, and therefore he demanded more money from the Duke for this. When the Duke did give permission to allocate money from the treasury to the magician to strengthen the defense, he replied that he was ready to do everything in his power and asked to rely on him. Belfort was pleased with the start of the day. Sylvia went to her room. She was accompanied by a housekeeper. The woman assured that the landlady had no more business today, and at the same time praised her dress, in which she looked extremely fantastic. The girl thought about how many dresses she had already tried on before the banquet. Selva assured that Sylvia would look good in any dress, so there was no point in trying on many dresses, and so carefully choose them. Sylvia believed that everything ended so quickly only because she finally and independently made a choice and made her decision. In the garden, the girl suddenly saw the magician lying in the middle of the lawn among a pile of written-off letters. The housekeeper saw Austin and pounced on him. She was already fed up with the magician often lounging around in different places of the castle and thus scaring the servants and guests. And now he still scared the new owner of the castle. It seemed that the magician did not listen to her. He complained that it was very noisy around, and he was too intelligent and educated person to fall asleep wherever he happened to be. He also asked not to touch him while he was lying down and doing his business. Thelma didn't listen to the wizard. She said that Sylvia could go to her rooms, and the housekeeper would remove it from the garden herself, so that it would not frighten the others. The sorcerer resented being called a middle class, but the Duke's wife asked the housekeeper to leave her and the magician alone. She had something to tell him. The knowledge that flashed before her from her past life indicated what Austin was really doing here. The magician was suspicious of the girl's proposal. Deep down, he still didn't rule out the possibility that Sylvia was the king's spy, and you should not tell her all the smallest details. The sorcerer was lying on the ground and was writing something on sheets of paper that were lying in front of him. The girl asked if he was writing the strengthening formula. She noticed that the magician referred to and used a formula that Alice had developed. After a short period of time, Austin shouted something. It was difficult to understand the result, but the sorcerer seemed to have managed to write the formula. But suddenly he worried that in case of failure and error, he would be forced to repeat the calculation. Sylvia understood that she had nothing to do with the formula now. She seemed to feel sorry for the sorcerer, but now it was impossible to allow herself slackness and help the sorcerer in his affairs. This may raise additional suspicions. A strange chain of thoughts flashed through the girl's head. If the sorcerer is lucky, the magical protection will increase. The knights will be able to react much faster to threats, and thus the probability of dying from an accident is unlikely. The Duke's wife asked the magician if she could look at his calculations. To the mage's protests, she said that her father was the deputy dean at the University of Alvarez, and therefore she has minimal knowledge of magic, and there are few things around that she would not have heard or read about, although she gives the impression of an uneducated and illiterate beauty who thinks only about dresses and other crap. But she soon became disillusioned with the formula. According to the housekeeper and many of the Duke's other people, Austen is called the only great magician. Of course, everyone talked about the fact that he was the strongest after Alice, but there were many mistakes in the formula. Austen was not happy that someone had snuck into his records. He said that when he was studying, he was also careless about helping people, but that soon passed, and the girl could spoil the formula if she draws too much there. But everything was written correctly in the girl's hand on the letter. Sylvia was about to leave, leaving the mage alone, but in the end she asked the mage not to tell the Duke about it. It was not necessary for her husband to know about her abilities, but the wizard was against it. He could not believe that the girl was able to figure out the secret formula just like that, and you couldn't tell anyone about it. And then he mentioned his promise to Belfort and the money that will be allocated to Austen. The wizard simply could not complain to the Duke. His suspicions will remain with him. However, he also could not allow some girl to outshine him, even though her father was the deputy rector of the famous university of the entire kingdom. Meanwhile, the Duke was preparing for the reception that was to take place this evening. Randall was worried that his wife would wait too long for her husband, but the assistant said that they had almost completed the preparations and everything was ready. The butler asked the Duke to look in the mirror. Randall felt that he was much more confident today than he had been before. Today he will definitely be successful with his lady, because Belfort was never confident in his appearance. The man could not wait for the moment when he would see his Sylvia. Today he had to wear the crown of the winner and act confidently. After all, his wife was such a beauty. Everyone around was delighted with him. In her rooms, Sylvia, in turn, was also preparing for the reception. However, her preparation was more scrupulous and thorough. Around her was a whole crowd of maids who admired their mistress. Their eyes seemed to glow with delight. One of the maids asked to be with Lady Belfort for another minute. Those present said that they wanted to be near such a beauty even for a second. She was the most beautiful girl they had ever met. Sylvia herself was not so happy. She lost count of the hours she spent in the meeting. The girl did not share the servants' delight, and she never knew how to squeak, and that did not make her any less feminine and beautiful. One of the maids announced the Duke's arrival. The maid said they had one last chance to show their mistress to the Duke. Sylvia didn't like it even more. At such moments, she felt like a doll. And that was just the beginning. What awaited her in the future, when the Duke would arrange balls? Finally, she went out into the hall to her husband. Randall was speechless with happiness and surprise. Sylvia begged to forgive her for the delay, but the man didn't care. He admired the girl's beauty so much that he was speechless. The girl asked if she should, if the Duke liked it so, come to bedchamber today in this dress. The question confused the Duke. He did not know what to answer him, so as not to be a slave, but also not to offend Sylvia. Those present in the hall looked at the Duke and his wife with admiration and surprise. The congratulations were sincere and from the whole heart. Men and women are amazed by the beauty of the Duchess. There was silence around for a moment. Rendell thanked the people who came to him and his wife in the palace to celebrate their wedding and solve important state affairs. Belfort introduced his wife and said that everyone would serve her as well as him. The aristocrats greeted her with applause. They said it was a great honor to serve such a famous and noble family. And above all, they wished for many years of family life and to give birth to children as soon as possible and engage in their upbringing. The women of the nobility said that this couple was very similar to some fairy tale couple of prince and princess. Everyone has already heard about how handsome Duke Belfort is, but no one could believe that his wife was so beautiful. People thought that the Duke and his wife harmonized very well. The strange woman thought that she shouldn't be so preoccupied with the Duke's current family, although he was close to the royal family. The Duke met with Marquis Secrin. Both were very happy to meet. Rendell inquired how the Marquis had been lately and whether Phil had come with them. But the Marquis noted with regret that Phil had not yet returned from the south, where he had gone to war. Marquis added that the boy had always been a troublemaker, and now it is worth worrying whether he will become a normal person after returning from the military campaign in the South. In addition, gossip talks about the imminent end of the war in the South.
There was also a prince of the blood who led armies of men into battle against their followers. From the outside, one got the impression that the Duke and the Marquis were very good close friends.
But in fact, it was clear that Rendell did not need it. Her husband tried to remain human in any situation. He is not interested in discussing the affairs of the state and the royal government. He just fulfilled the duty of protecting people, and that's all. An unknown lady approached Sylvia. She greeted the Duchess. The woman's name was Rubea Gleber. According to the Duchess, this woman had something to say. Such people sometimes become blinded after surpassing themselves in loyalty to their masters. Rubea! The woman's gaze was deep and seemed to penetrate to the very heart, confusing everything there, and as if raising it from the depths for the inspection of all present, mocking desires and secrets. The stranger asked if the Duchess knew how much trouble their marriage had caused in the north of the kingdom. The expression on his face was very serious. The current duke needs strength and power to raise the dukedom, and marriage was a good way to expand one's influence and power. One of her relatives was the most loyal vassals of His Majesty the King, but how much they can help the duke in war by military force. And finally, Rubea said that any girl who has more influence and whose family is more influential in the political arena and in the military field can be in her place. After all, personal qualities do not play a role here. Power is important here. Sylvia thought that this woman wanted to be with the Duke, and that is why you should beware of trickery on her part. But now, you can't show your weakness and insecurity. You cannot remain a weak woman in such a situation. Each of the opponents believed that her opponent should signal her weakness, whether it is the desire to fall on the floor or to cry. Public opinion will radically change in relation to the one who shows weakness of spirit. Sylvia asked the woman what she should do now. Rubea did not understand the question, and the Duke's wife asked if she should give up her love just because some upstart told her so. The girl asked if Rubea knew that neither she nor Randall had initiated their wedding, and that's why it's not relevant to accuse her of taking her husband by force. It means going against His Majesty's will. Their fight was interrupted by the appearance of a pentagram on the ceiling. The magic symbol glowed with dark energy. A monster, similar to a large octopus, began to appear from it. People ran in all directions. But in the midst of all this chaos, Sylvia alone stood in front of a dangerous monster, which is unknown how it got into this hall. Randall shouted for his wife to run away from the creature, but the girl at that moment understood that she could die right now. Without a doubt, she could end her existence now. All that remained was to take one more step towards death. But Rubea grabbed her hand. The woman shouted that it was necessary to get away and not stand in front of the monster. Rubea did not have time to escape from the monster. Instead, Sylvia herself covered it with her body. A bloody wound spread across his back. Blood flew in all directions. The Duke's wife fainted and fell to the floor. Sylvia woke up in Alice's body. A boy was sitting next to her. The girl asked his name, but the boy sat silently. The girl persistently asked, because she perfectly remembered how they met for the first time. The boy said his name was Cleon. The girl offered him to go with him, but the boy refused, just like last time. But he thought about whether to go or not, because once she saved him from death. Since then, Cleon has been her faithful dog on runs. But are her memories correct? Was this child the hero Cleon who saved the world? She wondered if her memories were failing her. Could something happen to her again? Sylvia was lying on the bed. Everything got confused in her head. The girl wondered again if Cleon was really the Leo she had met. After all, it was he who ultimately defeated the devil Alice. The Duke's voice broke her from her thoughts. The man sat next to her all night. He asked her how his wife was feeling. The girl tried to get up, but he stopped her. Although the sorcerer had healed her wound, it was still too early for her to get up, because there could be consequences. But Sylvia resisted his order. She thought that now was not the time to lie in bed. She noticed that her husband was crying. It really surprised her, and he didn't want her to see it. The Duchess wondered why he was putting her in an awkward position. She didn't want him to get the impression that the Duchess would be with him all the time, forever. But no matter what happened, Rendell always looked intently only at her. It seemed that the man saw nothing but her, and when he looked at her with such an open look, she had the impression that she was beginning to doubt. Her husband was too sweet, and she didn't want to hurt herself anymore. The girl was not ready to die now. Sylvia asked if she could ask her husband to share his warmth with her. Today, she did not have the strength to trade, so she just wanted to warm herself from the cold that prevailed in the rooms. Belfort doubted. It didn't start like the next time. The husband hugged his wife tightly. She responded to his caresses. But he said at that moment that after he killed the monster, he sent a letter to her relatives, the Ferret family, because they should have known about the attack. But Randall added that the defense system restored by Austen was not yet ready. So in the letter, he asked the Count and his wife not to rush to travel north because of the possibility of an attack by demons and their supporters. The girl felt that she was tired, but she was ready to be with this man in the future. But the Duke said he had decided to send her to her parents for a while. Austen will, of course, shout that he has no more mana. However, the county is quite close to the capital of the kingdom, so they will try to move the girl quite quickly from bed to bed. And such a trip would not harm Sylvia in any way and worsen her condition. The girl could not understand what her husband was talking about now. Randall said the north is a very dangerous place, and therefore it is worth hiding his wife away from a possible attack. It was a poorly suited place to live, and his intention to send Sylvia to her parents' estate in Floretta was final. He was very worried about how his wife would feel. After all, of course, they recently got married, and he already wants to send her home. Sylvia carefully looked at the man's face. It indicated that the decision to send her home was very difficult. This was preceded by long thoughts and weighing all the pros and cons. But for her, it was close to death. She was so used to her husband, she loved him very much. And now this person is sending her to her father's estate, back. She told her husband that in this case, not everyone would accept her as a duchess, and that would threaten her status. Belfort said that no one would dare to raise the issue. There was also the question of who will perform the work of the castle's mistress. The Duke replied that before the wedding he had solved these issues on his own. Now he will return to this scheme. The Duke blamed only himself for the attack during the banquet. He became very relaxed after the wedding and lost his vigilance. And thus it is not known who started to worship the cult of demons and began to help in their expansion on the land of people. He said that he didn't care what those around him would say, because it was his power to close the issue of Sylvia being the king's exiled spy. But he missed the moment to prepare an attack on his estate, and he has only himself to blame for this. The wife hugged the Duke. She firmly said that this is her house, and she is not ready to go anywhere from here. She liked the north. Servants and subordinates obeyed her. She liked them too. But most of all, she liked her husband, whom she loved very much. It so happened that the Duke pushed his beloved away. He was not ready to enter into a sexual relationship with her. He was not ready to do something bad to a sick person. And that's why you should take care of yourself. After all, you still have to work. After the fight with the monster, Endem searched the entire hall and found a thing with an engraving that should move things or living creatures from place to place. Belfort gave one last chance to confess to those who were involved. If the culprit is ready to come forward now and admit what he has done, then the Duke will end it all with a wave of his hand. But if the criminal is not ready to face the punishment now, then Randall will find him. The Marquise said the gem was attached to her dress, but she didn't know she was carrying such a powerful artifact. She certainly had no bad intentions or malice towards the Duchess. The stone got tangled in the lace of her dress, and Rubea did not notice this and inadvertently carried a stone into the hall, which opened the portal of the monster. The Duke could not believe it. Doubts swarmed in his head. An acquaintance of the woman said that she could easily be suspected of organizing the attempt. However, the girl replied that she would rather share useful information about the details of the attack than hide something and endanger Belfort. She then went on to say that when the monster attacked Sylvia, Rubea tore her dress in order to rewind the wounds of the Duchess, who heroically rushed to the woman's defense, even though there was a conflict between them. And already after that, Rubea paid attention to the stone that fell near her feet. In all this commotion, she simply did not pay attention to the stone. But then I thought that it could be a magical item, not a precious stone. And while everyone was paying attention to the aristocrat, one of the guests belatedly accused the servant. The man was pointing at a young boy who seemed to pull a rock out of his mouth before the monster appeared. The prosecution demanded to interrogate the boy and find out all the details of the attempt organized by the young man. The man himself said that he had nothing to do with the events that had just happened. But it didn't help. The vassal, who accused his servant of being late, was also arrested. After all, he was afraid to tell the truth right away, lest he also be suspected of organizing an attempt on the Duchess and the guests of the banquet. For the servant, it all ended with his head being chopped off. Before the punishment, he had time to say something else. Molodic told how difficult times are now, and how a stranger from the street offered him a lot of money for a favor. The Duke realized that the servant had met one of the traitors on the street who ruined his soul by an alliance and agreement with demons. It is necessary to expose the network of spies and agents of dark forces as soon as possible. You need to act quickly. The maids surrounded Sylvia. They were all talking and rejoicing that their mistress was finally safe. Her condition improved after the attack, thanks to the efforts of the Duke himself, and the servants made a doll that looked like the Duchess. The girl replied that thanks to Austin's magic, she felt much better. Although it was worth mentioning that even in good times, she did not look very healthy. Sylvia thanked the servants for the tour and went to her place. The girls assured that they would not allow their mistress to be offended, and she, in turn, may not worry about her safety. From now on, all of them are responsible for the Duke's wife. Sylvia did not expect such an attitude from the servants. For lunch, the servants served a set of wholesome food, specially prepared for the Duchess. Everyone around tried to please the young lady and help her recover as quickly as possible. The girls wished the hostess a pleasant appetite in every possible way. During a walk with the housekeeper, the Duchess said she felt sick and very nauseous. The woman asked if her mistress could not eat anything bad, and it could also be influenced by poor health after the attack. Sylvia was still thinking about why it was Rubea who gave her the first aid, with whom they quarreled and tried to humiliate in front of all the guests present a moment before the unfortunate event. At first glance, the behavior was strange. It can be assumed that in this way the woman protected her own interests, but it is difficult to say exactly what motives she harbored at that time. But when she lost consciousness, Rubea's father rushed to her. He ordered his daughter to leave. Rubea suddenly approached Sylvia. She wondered how the Duke's wife was feeling. The Duchess thanked her, because thanks to Rubea's help, the girl was able to survive. Death threatened the poor thing. The savior told Sylvia that she was very happy because of the improvement in the health of the Duchess. She hoped for a quick return of the Duke's wife to her ancestral estate, because the north is too dangerous a place for her. After Rubea said this, she ran headlong from Sylvia with the housekeeper. The women looked after the fugitive and wondered whether magic had been used or whether the girl was very ashamed. Thelma said that it was rather embarrassing. Sylvia asked if she could ask Thelma something. The woman agreed. The girl wondered why the relationship between Lady Rubea's father and Duke Belfort was so close. Thelma didn't answer right away. The housekeeper told a story that happened many years ago. Then a dispute broke out in the royal family about who would become the heir to the throne. But both princes did not want to start a war that would harm the kingdom. One of them abdicated in favor of his opponent. But he, in turn, replied that he could not accept his offer because he did not know what to do with the vassals who sided with his opponent. Both found themselves in a difficult situation again. But one of the princes said that he had decided to go to the north of the country. His opponent forgot about everything. He asked not to resort to such drastic methods of solving this issue. But the man was determined. He believed that this was the most adequate and effective way. In addition, the north was like a wasteland, and it was necessary to restore it and protect the people who lived there. And the prince could change something there. Thus, the prince, who went to the north, gave up the surname Lachlan. Instead, he took the surname Belfort. And this was the father of the present Duke Rendell Belfort. And then he managed to unite aristocrats and warring parties. Probably, the then Duke Belfort was able to melt the stern hearts of the northern nobility with his desire to fight against demons and fight against the enemies of the people who threatened the northern borders of the kingdom. Good times have come, but the Duke and his wife died in the battle with the monster. For little Randall, it was a heavy tragedy that greatly changed the character of the boy. He became the last contender for the throne of the kingdom. The Council of Lords ruled that the young duke could not rule. The North at that time needed a wise ruler and a great general. And until the little duke reached the required age, the lord elected by the council was to rule. The one who proposed this idea was immediately suspected of wanting to become a usurper. Little Randall witnessed the conversation of the lords of the North and long remembered their language and the things they talked about. After some time, an event happened. The little duke came to his court all ragged and with a severed arm that looked like a human. Those present were afraid of what could happen to the boy, but Rendell said that it is now also needed and useful to people. Then the people revolted against the lords, who, taking advantage of the position of the minor duke, robbed and profited from the population. The people supported Rendell and made him the true ruler of the northern lands. As a result, the king confirmed Rendell's status as duke and ruler of the north. And then he was able to independently take control of all the lords and vassals of this part of the kingdom. Since then, he has stood up to protect people from arbitrariness and monsters. The king could not fully trust the duke for a long time. For about 10 years, he constantly summoned Belfort to his court, under the pretext that he would make friends with the royal daughter. But the goal was to keep the powerful vassal close. Marquis Gleber was one of those who helped the duke in uniting the aristocrats. He always stood by Belfort's interests and supported him in the most difficult times. Randall could safely count on the Marquis. Sylvia thanked for the information. She thought that the duke grew up in an atmosphere of love and trust. However, now everything was clear. She was very wrong in her guesses and predictions. 1,000 thoughts appeared in my head at once. Now it was clear why the Marquis and his daughter enjoyed such authority with the duke. The wife speculated that the Marquis could become a traitor, and it was his actions that damaged one of the protection stones. She could tell about the betrayal to her husband. However, she did not know how he would react to his wife's words. It is she who has lived many lives, and now she will not be surprised by betrayal or other low actions of people. And the duke could not believe her words. The wife was worried about the fate and condition of her husband. Rendell could not believe her words, or it could turn him against his old ally, whom he had considered for many years his most loyal and most loyal to him. The girl called him. The man did not understand what was required of him. He slowly went to the doctor. Sylvia reminded him that he had promised not to cover himself with a blanket when they hugged. She wanted to believe that the duke would not break his word. Suddenly, she pounced on her husband. He was surprised at how his wife behaved. Sylvia promised that she would not do anything strange and terrible to him. However, Randall asked, if it wasn't strange, then what was it anyway? The wife was looking at the duke's back. His whole back was scarred. They were old, but what was most disconcerting was their number. The girl could not even imagine what happened to her husband and what he had to suffer in order not to lose his status. Rendell assured him that he was fine. However, she should not make such a tragic face. Deep down, he wanted to be happy, because the girl really cared about his fate, but at the same time, he didn't want Sylvia to be sad. Meanwhile, the knights repaired the damaged stones that protected the duke's lands. They had about 10 more to go. One of the knights asked the sorcerer if he could ask him a question. The magician said that 1 minute was worth 1 coin. The duke promised to pay on return. The wizard agreed. Rendell said the question was for his friend, not for him. Austin replied that he didn't care. The essence of the question was that the friend had a girlfriend, a real beauty. However, she got the impression that she was not interested in anything at all in her friend except for his body. And she behaves similarly. But the friend loves her very much, but he is not satisfied with her behavior. Austin asked if the friend really loved her. The wizard said that if the duke's friend does not love his beloved, then it is not worth worrying about. And then Rendell wondered if he loved Sylvia. The answer was obvious. He loved her with all his heart and was ready to do anything for her. He felt when his heart became warm from the fact that the girl was concerned about him, his affairs, constantly paid attention to him. But he was sorry that Sylvia was only interested in his body. It was insulting and unfair. The duke understood that any action of his beloved echoed in his heart and filled him with joy. He always had a smile on his face, even though he sometimes looked like an idiot. He could not believe that he loved her. Realizing his place and his feelings, he realized that he needed to act. It is worth starting with gifts for your beloved. No matter what happens in life, according to the magician, people often fall in love with a person who gives you gifts. This was only Austen's opinion, however. The more expensive the gift, the more a person fell in love with their companion. The wizard noticed how the Duke looked at him. The look was abusive, but the magician believed that the gift showed feelings very well. And therefore, a win-win strategy was to stay by her side and give her gifts until she became interested not only in her body, but also in her heart. It takes a lot of effort, but it's worth it. The Duchess came to visit Lady Rubea. The lady did not expect such a visit, but it was worth guessing what exactly brought the Duchess to her. But Sylvia said that the weather was actually very nice, and she had no one to go for a walk with. Rubea replied that she was not comfortable in the company of Duke Belfort's wife. To which Sylvia asked, was not the fact that she had saved the life of the Marquise's daughter a sufficient reason for friendship and reconciliation? The lady said to wait for her. It was necessary to pay tribute to the savior. After that, the women walked the streets of the city and talked about everything. Over time, the conversation went by itself, and it seemed that a friendship was born. At one of the bends in the street, a man and a woman approached Lady Rubea. They politely greeted the aristocrat. However, she was not happy to see them. This couple often met her at the local market and said that she was like their own daughter to them. This angered and embarrassed the proud and honorable girl, but the husband and wife asked her not to find fault with the words. The girl was embarrassed and looked at her companion. The lady asked the Duchess how she felt about such crowded places. Apologizing to Sylvia, the lady said that she also belongs to one of the ruling families of the North, and therefore, by communicating with ordinary people, she fulfills her duty to protect and care for the people living in her lands. Rubea behaved and thought. But the aristocrat herself, the daughter of a marquis, did not consider it something worthy and worthy of praise or admiration. Respect, in her opinion, did not need ordinary people. As a sign of reconciliation, the Duke's wife bought a brooch in the shape of a butterfly in a jewelry store. Rubea refused the gift, but Sylvia insisted on taking this modest gift from her as a sign of friendship. The girl thanked for the gift. The Duchess noticed that when a lady feels like a child or something like that, it has a very cute look, and she offered to continue their walk through the city. It was very interesting. Afterwards, Lady Rubea asked Sylvia if she could explain something. She asked why the Duchess had called her with her. The girl replied that she was interested in learning about the North. She sought to deepen her knowledge, and from that day on, the daughter of the Marquise had to tell her everything that related to this region. Sylvia was interested in absolutely everything, and since Rubea knew a lot about her motherland, she will be able to tell and share everything she knows. Rubea doubted that she could do anything good for Sylvia. The very thought of this caused her resistance. The Duke's wife said that as long as she was alive, Lady Rubea might not be expected to be Randall's wife.